Hey everyone, Tammy Davis, and I really want to thank you for joining me and hope you're having a great day wherever you are. I'm actually really excited to share a little bit of a different perspective. At least it seems like a different perspective to me. Maybe I've talked about it before, but I don't think so because, I just came from a brief meeting at an art gallery co-op it's a co-op that is looking for artists, and she had initially contacted me with regards to doing a local presentation on my work and with regards to integrative health and incorporating whole plants with medicinals as a means of upgrading our wellness. And as you know, the name of my business is Synergescence. Maybe you don't know, so it is. And the reason I gave it that name is because what's two words, it's taken from two words, synergy and essence, although not essence in the sense of essential oils, primarily essence meaning the nature. So it's the cooperative effect found throughout nature. And that is why she wanted me to give a talk. And then she started to mention that she was still looking for a couple of artists and she had some space. And yes, she's a businesswoman, so she is quite good at what she does. Yet, I have been taking photographs ever since I can remember. I love light, and I very in particularly love to photograph nature. And as a matter of fact, my area of interest is a macroscopic look at plants, essentially. And I'll show you here what I'm talking about. And that is the reason that prompted me to talk with you today or share this with you, because I am fascinated by getting an in-depth look. It's funny, as I was coming back up to my house and there was a car sitting outside and their license plate actually said in-depth. So I'll give you an example. Here's one photograph that I took, and here we go. And the reason I like this image is because this is actually two plants intertwined. And it's a really great representation of how one plant relies on another one. In this case, the vine type of plant needs light. It needs more light, and it doesn't get it if it's growing along the ground. And there was a lot of taller plants around, so it basically just created this relationship, if you will, with another plant where it just crawled up. It's not strangling this plant. They both are surviving. It's just that this particular plant actually required more light, and so therefore it used one plant in order to help it get what it needed. There's a resourcefulness to nature. There's an adaptability, a flow, and I've talked about that before, but it's really very it's an absolute. And the reason why this is important is because when I'm working with someone and they're generally taking medications, what happens with medications is we are trying to affect a certain change. There's a certain mechanism of action that each medication has. And while that may make some sense, but there's no absolute, we have no idea how it's going to affect every single person on the planet. At the same time, we have a general idea. That said, though, as I mentioned, nature has an adaptability. So what happens when we introduce medications or chemicals, what ultimately goes on is, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, what ultimately goes on is we are trying to control a particular outcome. And this is the reason why we end up having to take more things or having to change it out, because nature all of a sudden goes, nope, I'm going over here. It just keeps going. And so unfortunately, a lot of the effects become side effects, adverse reactions, and this is what causes us to need to have more. So that is the reason why, so we look at that as if there's something wrong, right? That nature isn't working in our favor when in fact it actually is. So It's just that the adverse reactions are essentially a message that we need to adapt. And you might say that we are, but the fact is that the more we take, the more information we're putting into the system, and that's why these photographs are so important, because I was really hesitant to even put these in a gallery. And I'm sharing them here with you because I'm actually really excited about it, because as somebody pointed out to me, this is basically an extension of who I am. My line of work is one. It's the mental aspect, and the photography is the creative aspect. But they're all looking at the same thing, which is nature at the smallest detail. So here's another one I wanted to show you. This one, let me see if I can get it without a glare. That is actually a rose. I'll show you the colored image as well. But that's a rose petal with water dripping off of it. And I captured that drop because it looks like the elixir of nature, right? And this is an important piece when it comes to the type of work that I'm doing, or for that matter, for any of us. This is the point I think that I'm trying to make, that I know that I'm trying to make. And that is that everything is a chemical, right down to water. Water is a chemical. That's the color image. And the reason why that's important for me to mention here is because we already know what water does. It's hydrogen and oxygen, as you know. And it is a chemical that is utilized by the body and by plants. And my point to that is that everything that we are exposed to is a chemical. And chemicals are the primary form of communication. Now, what's funny is that we think words are our communication. Pardon me, I just bumped the table. That the words are how we communicate, and you're absolutely right. Audible noise is a form of communication. We hear it. I mean, we're not the only species, but let's back up a little bit and let me just say that these audibles are originating from our chemistry. So there's actually a genetic complex called the FOXP2 gene that is a transcription factor, which means it actually regulates neurochemistry, and it is primarily linked to speech and language. But what we also know is that animals that do not articulate words but still make sound actually have these genes as well. So it's more of a sound. It's a different form of communication, but yet it is influenced by our chemistry. And that, on that note, I just want to say that there's over 70 million people on the planet currently diagnosed with autism alone. And we are, as a species, the only species that is being targeted, where that FOXP2 gene is targeted is being deactivated. I've talked about this in other videos, that the body has the ability to activate and deactivate our genes. And I used autism as an example because a large portion of that population is nonverbal. This is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong. This isn't about whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just a fact. And again, this is all being regulated by our chemistry. And some people may say, well, that's a problem. And that, we can get into all of the politics and the dynamics of it. Absolutely. And if I ever meet you, I'm happy to sit down and have a long conversation about that. Because as I've talked about, even in my previous video, that is, besides the mental and emotional stress that we're familiar with, environmental stress is a big factor. And again, we may say that, environment bad, boo, and it's causing all these problems. It is just a fact of nature. This is what we've created as a species, and we're having to manage the fallout. And this is another reason why working with nature is so important, and understanding that everything that we come in contact with, there's constant information, and the nature itself, if we're talking about plants, will absolutely survive without human input. Yes, there are domesticated plants that we take care of, absolutely. And at the same time, what's really important to keep in mind here is that nature on its own has the ability to communicate. It's in constant communication. This is how plants reproduce. This is how animals reproduce. This is how plants and animals protect themselves. This is how plants and animals actually grow. I mean, this is what happens. Communication is happening on all levels all the time, and that's the important thing that I wanted to mention here, which is if we're using pharmaceuticals, that's one chemical. If we're using nutraceuticals, that's another chemical. If you're eating food, that's another chemical. If you're drinking water, that's another chemical. That's the reason why understanding how to use essential oils is imperative, because they are also chemicals. And as I mentioned earlier, even though we think we have an idea of how a medication is going to affect the body, there's no absolute, because your genome is your genome. And the same thing can be said for essential oils. I understand that we have plenty of books. There's a plethora of information out there on how to use essential oils, but not everyone is going to be affected the same way, especially on an ongoing basis. And that's my primary concern. If you're using something intermittently or just occasionally, just on the off chance that something happened and you want to use lavender, say, that's okay. Knowing your source is absolutely necessary, and understanding the chemistry that's involved in essential oils, because essential oils, like our refined and processed food, is subject to adulteration. So that would be one reason why oils don't necessarily always do something for someone, because it could be heavily adulterated. Secondly, as I mentioned, if it's on an occasional basis, maybe like once or twice a month, or maybe once a week, or however, you got to start use caution when you're getting into like once a week, because that's going to be on an ongoing basis. But because it's just going to draw it out a little bit. But like I mentioned, the chemistry affects our system, and the body will activate and deactivate more than we can account for. And that's what I mean when I say nature's going to go, we do one thing and nature's going to go, well, I'm going to go over here, I'm going to take care of that. And I'm going to go over here and I'm going to take care of that. I was talking with somebody just last night about antibacterial soaps, and somebody's saying, well, that's not a good thing to be doing. Well, the thing is bacteria, like plants, if I could photograph, and I know people do with microscopes, bacteria, I would, because bacteria and viruses are amazing organisms, since they have the ability to adapt to what we're presenting. So even if we kind of take the human species out of the equation and just look at bacteria, the bacteria will adapt, because nature is about thriving. It's about surviving and thriving. And there are plenty of debates to say that we are getting sicker and we have a large population of mental and emotional instability and blah, blah, blah. And that, that nature's working against us, and that's not the case. We're not paying attention to nature. We are nature. And nature will make changes in order to accommodate, in order to respond to the messages coming in. Keep in mind, chemicals are the way nature communicates. It's just the way, and our body is nature, and we are very much like a bacteria, that the body is just going to change and adapt in order to survive and thrive. Yes, there's a lot of people that are struggling with their health, but that's not to say that there's a problem. It's to say that it is a call to action. It's to say, hey, look, I'm doing everything I can to adapt here, and you keep giving me more information, and I just keep responding to it. This is the reason why I say we do not want to be duplicating the mechanisms of action. So if you're taking medication, you don't want to be using plants. It's better to use whole plants like foods and oils would be a great combination because we already know what food is, and that contains the nutrients that work in tandem with the oils. But you want to use things that create stability, not duplicating action. Because the more we duplicate action, the more we're pushing the body to do one thing, and it's going to keep trying to change because it's resisting. And so if you have to take medications, don't be angry about it. Accept it. And if you end up having to come off of them at some point because things are improving, then that's great news. But what you want to do is you don't want to overdo it in one direction. I hope that makes a lot of sense because, as I said, nature communicates through chemicals. Yes, we do, and we have audibles, but the primary form of communication throughout nature is chemicals, and your essential oils and your herbs and your vitamins and your minerals and everything else is considered a chemical, and the body's going to respond accordingly. And there's no guarantee how it's going to go, so minimal amounts, depending on what you're dealing with, that creates stability, that actually creates a whole. That's the whole idea of holistic health, and that's the reason why integrative health would be, it's important to include whole plants, not products derived from plant constituents. And that can be anything. That could be nutraceuticals, that could be medications, it could be anything. So if you are using something that's derived from the study of plant constituents, that's fine. But you also want to be counterbalancing it with whole plant. And that's where you're going to get your most benefit. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed this couple of images I shared with you. I'm really excited to be in this gallery. And let me know how I might be able to answer any questions you have, if there's something specifically you'd like to know more about. All right. Thanks for watching. And until next time, be well. Tammy at synergessence.com. Follow me on Instagram at TammyDavis8 and Twitter at TammyDavis8. All right. Thanks. Bye now.